This caused them to adapt to the colder conditions anatomically. Our last common ancestor with Neanderthals split off about 500,000 years ago. They then split from Denisovans as late as 470,000 years ago or as early as 200,000 years ago. Before splitting, Neanderthal Denisovans or Neanderthosovans migrating out of Africa into Europe apparently interbred with an unidentified super archaic human species. These super archaics were the descendants of a very early migration out of Africa around 1.9 million years ago. Neanderthals would then expand into a fairly large range, although their population was quite small. They are recorded living in Western, Central, Eastern, and Mediterranean Europe, as well as Southwest, Central, and Northern Asia up to the Altai Mountains in southern Siberia. The southernmost find was recorded at Shukba Cave, Levant. Their easternmost presence is recorded at Denisova Cave, Siberia. They also lived as far north as the British Isles and possibly as far as southern Scandinavia. But for much of their existence, these areas were covered in glaciers. To add to this, the evidence of their occupation of these areas may have been destroyed by glaciers. Like mentioned earlier, their population was quite small. Various studies using mtDNA analysis yield very ineffective populations, such as about 1,000 to 5,000, 5,000 to 9,000 remaining constant, or 3,000 to 25,000 steadily increasing until about 52,000 years ago before declining until extinction. Their population was only a tenth of the size of contemporary sapiens. Neanderthals were robust and stocky compared to modern humans. They had barrel-shaped rib cages and wider pelvises. Their forearms and forelegs were also proportionally shorter. Based on 45 Neanderthal long bones from 14 men and 7 women, the average height was 165 centimeters or 5 feet 5 for males. Females were shorter at 152 centimeters or 5 feet. For comparison, the average height of 28 male or 10 female Upper Paleolithic humans is 176 centimeters or 5 foot 9 inches for men. Women, on the other hand, were 163 centimeters or 5 foot 4 inches. The fossil record shows adult Neanderthals varied from about 147.5 to 177 centimeters or 4 foot 10 inches to 5 foot 10 inches. Some certainly grew larger, and a height of 182 centimeters or 6 feet was likely attainable. For Neanderthal weight, samples of 26 specimens found an average of 77.6 kilograms or 171 pounds for males and 66.4 kilograms or 146 pounds for females. The body mass index for Neanderthal males was calculated to be 26.9 to 28.2. which in modern humans correlates to being overweight. Though for Neanderthals, this just indicates a very robust build. The Neanderthal LEPR gene concerned with storing fat and body heat production is similar to that of the woolly mammoth. It was likely an adaptation for cold climate. The neck vertebrae of Neanderthals are longer and thicker than those of modern humans, lending to stability, possibly due to different head shapes and sizes. Body proportions are usually cited as being hyperarctic as adaptations to the cold, because they are similar to those of modern human populations which developed in cold climates. The Neanderthal build is most similar to that of the Inuit and Siberian Yupiks among modern humans. Nonetheless, Neanderthals from more temperate climates such as Iberia still retain the hyperarctic physique. In 2019, English anthropologist John Stewart suggested Neanderthals were adapted for sprinting. Their robust bodies may have allowed them to quickly run after prey. Neanderthals generally did prefer warmer wooded areas over the colder mammoth steppe. DNA analysis also indicates a higher proportion of fast-twitch muscle fibers in Neanderthals than modern humans. Stewart explained their body proportions and greater muscle mass as adaptations to sprinting as opposed to the endurance-oriented modern human physique, as persistence hunting may only have been effective in hot climates where the hunter can run the prey to the point of heat exhaustion. They had longer heel bones, reducing their ability for endurance running, and their shorter limbs would have increased the speed at which their muscles contracted. So they no doubt would have been good sprinters, but this may not be the only reason for their physique. Climate also definitely played a role. Another controversial aspect of their anatomy was their humerus. There has long been a debate in anthropology over the anatomy of Neanderthal humeri and whether it would have been efficient at throwing spears. Originally, evidence seemed to indicate that their shoulders could not overarm throw well. They were thought to be better adapted to thrusting. This was also backed up by how many wounds they received in their lifetimes. If they really did only stab their prey, then they would have had to get up close and personal with these very dangerous animals. However, this notion of stabbing big dangerous animals has been fading away. Berthaum et al. 2014 found that Neanderthal humeri were efficient at both thrusting and throwing. There was no evidence that thrusting was more prominent. It also found that sapien and Neanderthal humeri, although different, showed similarities in resisting throwing and thrusting stress. To add to this, the Shawnigan spears dating to over 300,000 years ago were found to be efficient throwing weapons. They were balanced and able to be thrown over 20 meters or 65 feet. Though they are often credited to European Homo heidelbergensis, these people would have been near indistinguishable from early Neanderthals because this is right around the time when their species appeared. We also know that Homo erectus, a distant ancestor of Neanderthals and sapiens, had efficient arms for throwing millions of years ago. All of this evidence seemed to indicate that they certainly could throw, and the Shawnigan spears indicate they did. They still would have been ambush predators, and certainly stabbed their prey when they got close. You could even imagine some Neanderthals out of the group were not that good at throwing, so maybe some would prefer to get up close and personal. And even if you spear a large animal, they still often have a lot of fight in them. Trying to finish off these animals would lead to the injuries that we do see in their remains. Neanderthals had bigger brains than modern humans. The Neanderthal brain case averages 1,600 cubic centimeters for males and 1,300 cubic centimeters for females. Modern humans average 1,270 cubic centimeters for males and 1,130 cubic centimeters for females. However, Homo sapiens specimens from between 190 and 25,000 years ago averaged about 1,478 cubic centimeters disregarding sex. Modern human brain size is suggested to have decreased since the Upper Paleolithic. The largest Neanderthal brain, Amud 1, was calculated to be 1,736 cubic centimeters, one of the largest ever recorded in hominids. Now I wonder if this guy was any smarter than any of his contemporaries or if the brain matter was just used for other things. Interestingly, both Neanderthal and human infant brain cases measure about 400 cubic centimeters. In Neanderthals, the occipital lobe was much larger than in modern humans, and similarly they had larger eyes, probably as an adaptation to lower light conditions in Europe. More brain tissue was devoted to bodily maintenance and control, and consequently the cognitive areas of the brain were proportionally smaller than in modern humans. They would have been less proficient in language, attention, working memory, social abilities, and thought in general. How much so is up for debate. Since we obviously do not have a living specimen, it is very hard to say how smart they were. It is a great mystery how one of these people would fare in the modern day. If you were to acquire a Neanderthal baby, could you teach it English? Could it learn math? Could it socialize like a sapien? These are all very intriguing questions that we may never be able to answer. Depictions of Neanderthals were originally very primitive and ape-looking. In more recent years, we have discovered that Neanderthals were much more human-looking than once thought. Their faces differed from ours in a few general ways. They had a reduced chin, sloping forehead, and a large nose. The Neanderthal skull is typically more elongated and less globular than that of modern humans. They also had an occipital bun, a protrusion on the back of the skull, although it is within the range of variation for modern humans who have it. They had larger eyes, likely adapted to a low-light environment like previously mentioned. The large Neanderthal nose has generally been explained as having warmed air as it entered the lungs and retained moisture. Neanderthals featured a protrusion of the jaw known as prognathism. This may have been to make room for the large teeth that they had. Neanderthal dental wear patterns are most similar to that of the modern Inuit. The bite force of Neanderthals and modern humans is now thought to be about the same. The lack of sunlight in Europe led to the proliferation of lighter-skinned Neanderthals. These are the same forces that eventually led to the lighter-skinned European sapiens. Our bodies primarily synthesize vitamin D rather than getting it from food. Vitamin D is synthesized when UV rays from the sun enter our skin. Lighter skin absorbs more of this light while darker skin blocks it out. Europeans need lighter skin to get vitamin D from the limited sunlight they receive. African and other groups, on the other hand, have darker skin because they are subjected to intense sunlight every day. Too much sunlight damages cells and can lead to cancer. For this reason, human skin color varies depending on the environment. Neanderthals primarily live in northern areas and thus needed lighter skin. They did live closer to the equator in places such as the Mediterranean and the Middle East. These populations had darker skin and hair. The DNA of 3 Croatian Neanderthals show they had darker hair, skin, and eye color than modern Europeans. MC1R is a receptor gene that controls the production of melanin, the protein responsible for pigmentation of the hair and skin. Neanderthals had a mutation in this receptor gene which changed an amino acid, making the resulting protein less efficient and likely creating a phenotype of red hair and pale skin. Modern humans display similar mutations of MC1R, and people who have 2 copies of this mutation have red hair and pale skin. No modern human has the exact mutation that Neanderthals had, which means that both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens evolved this phenotype independent of each other. Some groups of Neanderthals certainly had red hair, such as in Italy and Spain. However, as in modern humans, red was probably not a very common hair color because the variant is not present in many other sequenced Neanderthals. Genetic analysis indicates that there were at least 3 distinct geographical groups: Western Europe, the Mediterranean coast, and east of the Caucasus. These 3 populations differed anatomically. Southern Neanderthals exhibit regional anatomical differences from that of their northern counterparts: a less protrusive jaw, a shorter gap behind the molars, and a vertically higher jawbone. Neanderthals living west of the Altai Mountains also had their own differences. This suggests Neanderthal communities regularly interacted with neighboring communities within a region, but often not far beyond. Nonetheless, over long periods of time, there is evidence of large-scale cross-continental migration. Early specimens from Mezmaiskaya Cave in the Caucasus and Denisova Cave in the Siberian Altai Mountains differ genetically from those found in Western Europe, whereas later specimens from these caves both have genetic profiles more similar to Western Europe Neanderthals. Similarly, artifacts and DNA from other caves also in the Altai Mountains resemble those of Eastern European Neanderthal sites about 4,000 kilometers or 2,500 miles away. This suggests 2 distinct migration events into Siberia. Neanderthals are considered to be the apex predators of their environment. They would get close to their prey or wait for their prey to get close to them, and then in a powerful burst of speed throw or thrust their spears into their prey. Younger or wounded animals may have been hunted using traps, projectiles, or pursuit. Over their vast range, they employed a variety of hunting and gathering techniques. Communities on the Mammoth Steppe would primarily eat large game with a variety of local plants. Forest-dwelling communities would have consumed a wide array of plants and smaller animals such as deer and rabbit. Tribes living on or around the Mediterranean would consume aquatic resources. Generally, their diet seemed to be less varied than that of sapient hunter-gatherers, but still varied enough to ward off nutritional deficiencies. For many communities during the winter, lean meat would have been about the only thing around to eat. They would have supplemented by eating fat-rich brains, roots and tubers, and the stomach contents of herbivorous prey animals. Plants which have been semi-digested by these herbivores would have been a good source of nutrients for these people. Though it sounds odd, it is a practice still done by the Inuit who have little access to plants during the winter. They fed primarily on hooved animals. Red deer and reindeer were consumed most frequently, and they were the most abundant. Other game included ibex, Irish elk, wild boar, aurochs, mammoth, straight-tusked elephant, and woolly rhino. There is evidence of directed cave and brown bear hunting both in and out of hibernation, as well as butchering. Analysis of Neanderthal bone collagen from Vindija Cave, Croatia shows nearly all of their protein needs derived from animal meat. Some caves show evidence of regular rabbit and tortoise consumption. At Gibraltar sites, there are remains of 143 different bird species, many of them ground-dwelling. Neanderthals also exploited marine resources on the Iberian, Italian, and Peloponnesian peninsulas, where they waded or dived for shellfish. At Vanguard Cave, Gibraltar, the inhabitants consumed Mediterranean monk seal, short-beaked common dolphin, common bottlenose dolphin, Atlantic bluefin tuna, sea bream, and purple sea urchin. You may be wondering, how did they manage to catch such animals? Well, paleontologists are still wondering. Seals can be caught once they come ashore, and beach dolphins would have been easy prey. Fish can be caught with nets and hooks. At Gruta da Figueira Brava, Portugal, there is evidence of large-scale harvest of shellfish, crabs, and fish. Evidence of freshwater fishing was found at Grotte di Civita, Italy for trout, chub, and eel. As many of you know, fishing is not easy. Fish are smarter than you think, and they are really good at escaping once caught. The wide variety of fish caught by this people tells us that they might have employed a wide variety of tactics to catch them. The presence of all these fish remains indicate that they may have had better fishing technology than once thought. Besides hunting and fishing, they also foraged often. Edible plant and mushroom remains are recorded from several caves. Neanderthals from Cueva del Cedrón, Spain, based on dental tartar, likely had a meatless diet of mushrooms, pine nuts, and moss, indicating they were forest foragers. Remnants from Amud Cave, Israel indicate a diet of figs, palm tree nuts, and various cereals and edible grasses. It's amazing to think that some groups may have been more or less vegetarians. Others were hyper-carnivores who hardly touched green plants. Dental tartar from Grota de Spies, Spain, indicates the inhabitants had a meat-heavy diet including woolly rhinoceros and mouflon sheep, while also regularly consuming mushrooms. The oldest known human fecal matter remains show that a particular group in Spain ate mainly meat and plant matter. Evidence of cooked plant foods, including legumes and acorns, has been found in Israel. Many groups of Neanderthals were quite nomadic, likely due to their hunting and foraging needs. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, Neanderthals collected plants with various harvest seasons, indicating they scheduled returns to the area to harvest certain plants. This indicates that they had complex food gathering behaviors for both meat and plants. To be a hunter-gatherer required a deep knowledge of your land and an expansive mental map of your environment. These people were certainly masters of survival, but they didn't survive unscathed. Neanderthals faced ruthless competition with the other Ice Age predators. They coexisted with most of these predators for about 200,000 years. This tells us that neither the ruthless predators nor the Neanderthals pushed each other to extinction. Regardless, competition would have been fierce. Cave lions as large as the biggest tigers targeted horses, large deer, and wild cattle. Homotherium, known as the scimitar cat, hunted young mammoths and other fairly large game. Wolves would have hunted a variety of prey. Leopards mainly targeted reindeer and roe deer. This heavily overlapped with the diet of Neanderthals. Fortunately for our evolutionary cousins, leopards are solitary creatures, so defending a kill from them would have not been very difficult. However, the other predators certainly craved our kills. To deter such predators, Neanderthals likely engaged in intimidation tactics such as yelling, arm waving, and stone throwing. Being able to quickly harvest game was a necessity for these people. Deer and other small game could be dragged off, but larger game would have put them at a higher danger of encounters with lions or hyenas. They were not helpless in their skirmishes with rival predators. The remains of wolves, cave lions, and cave bears, which were all major predators of the time, indicate Neanderthals hunted their predators to some extent. Neanderthals and cave hyenas might have actually exemplified niche differentiation. They would have actively avoided each other when they could. Animal remains from Neanderthal caves indicate they targeted prime individuals while hyenas hunted weaker or younger prey. Nonetheless, in typical hyena fashion, encounters over food would have become hostile and may have been a large factor in how Neanderthals protected their kills. Remains of Neanderthals indicate that they were either preyed upon or scavenged by these powerful beasts. In addition to ruthless hyenas, bears were certainly to be feared by these people. Cave bears stood 3.5 meters or nearly 12 feet in height. They also weighed up to 1,000 kilograms or 2,200 pounds. However, cave bears were mainly herbivores that hunted very rarely, and most of the remains they ate would have been scavenged. Still, such a powerful animal would have been hard to stop even with a whole tribe of spear-wielding Neanderthals. Remains indicate that bear hunts may have been a cultural practice among some groups. Regardless of all of the formidable predators that occupied their lands, Neanderthals seemed to thrive alongside them. At Grotte du Lazaret in France, a total of 23 red deer, 6 ibexes, 3 aurochs, and 1 roe deer appear to have been hunted in a single autumn hunting season. The entire carcasses seem to have been transported to the cave and then butchered. Because this is such a large amount of food to be consumed, it is possible these Neanderthals were curing and preserving the food before winter set in. The evidence is 160,000 years old, and it is the oldest potential evidence of food storage. It would make sense that they were capable of preserving their food. A whole mammoth or woolly rhino would have left substantial leftovers for even a whole tribe of Neanderthals. Neanderthals seem to have cooked most of their food. They roasted meat and plants and likely even created stews. The abundance of animal bone fragments at settlements may indicate the making of fat stocks from boiling bone marrow, possibly taken from animals that had already died of starvation. This would have been a very important meal because fat was a hot commodity for Neanderthals. Many groups were basically on a ketogenic diet for most of the year. Lean meat would have had to be supplemented with fat. This bone broth would have been a good way to do it. Neanderthal tooth size had a decreasing trend after 100,000 years ago, which would indicate an increased dependence on cooking or the advent of boiling, a technique that would have softened food. It is important to note this because many get the notion that Neanderthals were stagnant beings that never progressed. In reality, just like sapiens, we see trends of evolution within their species. At Cueva del Cedrón, Spain, Neanderthals likely cooked and possibly smoked food, as well as used certain plants such as yarrow or chamomile as flavoring. This is not for certain, as these plants could have been used as medicine. With shellfish, Neanderthals needed to eat, cook, or in some manner preserve them soon after collection, as shellfish spoils very quickly. At a cave in Spain, there is evidence that they are keeping these shellfish alive in water-soaked algae. It blows my mind that these people ate so much seafood. The classic picture of a Neanderthal hunting big game is true, but it leaves out the diversity of diets between groups. Their diet was so diverse, in fact, that they even ate each other. There are several instances of Neanderthals practicing cannibalism across their range. Examples come from Croatia, Spain, France, and Belgium. 5 cannibalized remains of Neanderthals in Belgium met a gruesome fate. There is evidence that their upper limbs were disarticulated and the lower limbs smashed and the chest cavity disemboweled. About 35% of the Neanderthals at Marillac-le-Franc, France, show clear signs of butchery, and the presence of digested teeth indicate the bodies were abandoned and eaten by scavengers later. Based on this evidence, it would be easy for one to make the assessment these people were brutish cannibals. Closer examination of the evidence shows that the high number of cut marks present on the Neanderthal individuals indicate a lack of experience in butchering human carcasses. To aid to this, total cannibalized individuals are actually quite small when compared to the total number of fossils we have. Cannibalism would have not been a very common practice. Other groups may have gone many generations without tasting the flesh of their kin. Anthropologists interpret this behavior in a few ways. Ritualistic behavior, pre-burial defleshing to deter scavengers, an act of war, or simply for food. And before you place judgment on these people, let me say this. Homo sapiens, just like our Neanderthal cousins, are also cannibals. Archaeological evidence has shown that thousands of years ago we were partaking in similar behaviors. And of course, even in modern times, cannibalism happens. And not just out of desperation. There have been whole societies that eat people in both ritualistic and non-ritualistic ways. For example, the Aztecs were known to partake in ritualistic cannibalism. Our disgust towards this practice is due to our culture rather than it being objectively wrong. At the end of the day, we are made out of meat, and whether it be hard times or a strange religious worship, cannibalism is a natural human behavior. So when looking at the evidence of Neanderthals eating each other, do not make generalizations about the species. Even if some groups ate people, some may have been just as disgusted as you or I at the idea of eating their kin. Fire was one of the most important technologies these people possessed. Many Mousterian sites have evidence of fire, and some for extended periods of time. It is unclear if they were capable of starting their own fires. They could have scavenged them from naturally occurring fires. Indirect evidence of fire technology includes pyrite residue on a couple dozen bifaces. When flint is struck against this material, sparks fly. These sparks could be harnessed into a combustible material to produce fire. It is a skillful and hard process, but we know these people were capable of a lot. The amount of evidence of fire found at Neanderthal sites, some only inhabited during the winter, tell us that fire was likely not just harvested from natural wildfires. It is pretty safe to say that at least some bands would have been able to produce fire. Hearths have been discovered in a number of caves. Neanderthals likely considered air circulation when making these hearths. At a site in Spain, 8 evenly spaced hearths, lined up against the rock wall, were likely used to stay warm while sleeping, with one person sleeping on either side of the fire. Other caves show evidence that smoke was let out of the cave through natural ventilation. We have evidence that a lot of their food was cooked, especially animal remains. Even plants were cooked as mentioned in the food section. Fire was certainly one of the most important technologies that these people possessed and helped them survive in many ways. But it was only one of their tools. Neanderthals made a wide array of tools to thrive in their world. And these tools did not stagnate. They changed as the years passed and the technology progressed. They are credited with creating the Mousterian industry, a more complex and advanced form of working stone. It evolved from the Levallois industry about 160,000 years ago. The Levallois was its close predecessor, and the two are sometimes considered as one. The Levallois industry made it easier to control flake size and shape, and as a difficult-to-learn process, the Levallois technique may have been directly taught generation to generation rather than purely on observational learning. There is a relatively high diversity in Neanderthal stone tool production that we don't see in other hominid species for thousands of years. Proposed explanations include unique ethnic traditions and a diversity of uses. For example, a tool that is good at killing a deer may not fare well in killing an elephant. Given that the Neanderthal diet varied from rabbit to seals to elephant, it makes sense that there would be diversity in tool production. Stone tools included disc-shaped cores, flake tools, well-made scrapers, and triangular points that were used as knives. Denticulate tools were made to serve as saws. They could be used to make notches in wood or to saw it in half. Round limestone balls found at Neanderthal sites are believed to serve as bolas, a weapon used to this day consisting of 3 balls at the end of a string that can trip animals. Weapons to actually kill game varied. Wooden spears lacking a stone tip were certainly in use throughout Neanderthal existence. More complicated hafted stone tips did become more common later in Neanderthal technological tradition. 55,000 years ago, towards the twilight of Neanderthal existence, they created leaf-shaped stone tips that were hafted on spears. They were likely used as thrusting weapons. The wide point would have been exceptional at causing massive blood loss for prey. These points in particular were hafted on wooden shafts, used, reshaped, perhaps used again, and then finally discarded. They were hafted with plant-based glue and bindings made from plant fibers. They would have been deadly tools, and couple them with the pure strength of a Neanderthal, and even a Paleoloxodon has reason to fear. There is still some debate if Neanderthals had long-range projectile weapons. We do know that their arms could throw, so it is certainly a possibility. A wound on the neck of an African wild ass from Syria was likely inflicted by a heavy javelin.